basically the accepted framework for looking at problems, at farming, I would say, is, could you just click, Janelle?
Sure.
Is, okay, you got low availability. Well, the solution is you apply nitrogen fertilizer. Click again, please.
Oh, hold on a minute. Let me.
And sometimes you need to click a few times to make it go.
There we go. I've got it.
You've got an insect infestation. Well, the answer is apply insecticide. You've got a compact soil. You use something like a subsoiler to go in and really rip it apart. And keep going. And droughty soil, well, you've just got to irrigate more frequently. Weedy conditions, apply an herbicide. In other words, you're reacting to problems that you see. All right. Next slide, please. And an ecological approach is different than that. If you could click and we can bring up what else is on there.
All right, sure.
The problems that occur really are what we think of as problems are really an indication of an unhealthy ecosystem. That is, the soils and the fields that we're dealing with are an ecosystem, and they are not healthy, and you have problems that arise or things that you feel are problems. Next slide, please. It's the whole point of ecological management of soils is, or of agriculture, is try to prevent, that is, instead of reacting, try to prevent, develop on, and rely on the strengths of the agricultural ecosystem instead of reacting with external interventions such as pesticides and commercial fertilizers. Not saying that you might not need them, but that doesn't become your first line of defense. It becomes your absolute last line of defense. Next slide, please. So basically, if I don't know if people here are farmers or extension people or whoever you are, but if you're doing a management practice in a field, it should contribute to one of these three, okay? Either creating the conditions in the soil or above ground for healthy plants to grow that have enhanced defenses, and I'm going to talk about that, suppressing pests, and enhancing beneficials. If what you're doing is not contributing to one of these, then you should be questioning why you're doing it, okay? And I think that the practices, the ecologically sound practices, you can maybe contributing to one or two or all of the above, as a matter of fact. And one of them we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, which is cover crops, so that really impacts all of those. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is part of a graphic that's in the book, by the way, and I'm taking some materials from the book, but not all. And you can see what's in the middle there in green is what I just showed you. And what you're doing is you're contributing to that by building healthy soils. That's below ground habitat conservation and enhancement. And you're doing things above ground, which, by the way, impact the soil as well, of course. What crop you select, your planting management, et cetera. Most of those have some interaction with the soil itself, not the enhancement of the field surroundings, but just about everything else does. Next slide, please. So what are the characteristics of a healthy soil? Just quickly, we can go through these. We want to have sufficient but not excess nutrients, good tilth, that is good soil structure, sufficient depth, good water storage and drainage, which, by the way, is a aspect of good tilth, of good soil structure. We want it to be free of chemicals that might harm plants. Next slide, please. We'd like it also to have a low population of plant diseases and parasitic organisms, high populations of organisms that help plant growth. The next, low weed pressure, obviously. And the next, resistance to being degraded. And the last, if there is some harm that happens, let's say because you've made a mistake, you got on the soil when it's too wet or some other thing, you'd like a healthy soil should be resilient. It should be able to bounce back quicker than an unhealthy soil. The next one. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about this evening is really selected topics, I would say, in soil health, concentrating on the issue of soil health and pests. And one of the things that I'd like to mention is the importance of soil biodiversity. It's not only that we want a biodiverse group of organisms in the soil, but we want them to be active. And we have organisms that actually promote plant growth by giving directly by emitting chemicals that are hormone-like and stimulate the plant growth. Diversity helps maintain low population of disease organisms, and organisms that trigger organisms in the soil may trigger plant defense mechanisms, which I'll talk about. Before we go on, the bottom right is a movie, which you're not going to be able to see, unfortunately, but that's a nematode trapping fungus. You can see the hoops at the bottom there, and those hoops are a nematode will swim into those hoops and it will trap the nematode. So you have fungi that eat nematodes. Okay, that's their food source. And on the upper right, you have a nematode that's feeding on a fungal hyphae. Okay, the nematode's coming from the lower left and is feeding on a fungal hyphae, which is going diagonally through the main part of the screen, the middle part. So we have this tremendous diversity of organisms. Next slide, please. These are also videos that you can't see, but the upper left would be bacteria feeding. The lower right, you can see the amoeba. There's the one on the top is just about to grab a bunch of bacteria, and the amoeba. Oh my goodness!
It works.
It works. By George, try the bottom one. Click again, and see what happens.
Yep.
Yeah, look at it. Look at it. Yes, absolutely. Well. So you've got all sorts of interesting things happening below the surface of the ground, and there are these wide diversity of organisms which we want to stimulate their presence. And if you can go to the next slide, I think that's enough of the amoeba. This is just a slide. This is from the book of a version of the food web in the soil. There are many that you've seen probably or know about, but starting in the lower left, you start with organic residues of plants, usually, and then there are bacteria and fungi that feed on the plants, and then there are things that feed on the fungi. There are worms that could also feed on the plants that have microbiota in their guts that work on them, and you can see that these organisms are then ate by other organisms that are then eaten by other organisms. And this is the food web. And then, of course, the higher ones, they all will die and they will be recycled through the system. The next slide, please. Okay, one of the organisms that we're interested in soils, the microorganisms, is our mycorrhizal fungi. And this is just a graphic which we borrowed with permission, of course. It's in the textbook, but just showing those white growths off of the roots. Are mycorrhizal fungi, which basically provide a great extension of the root surface area into the soil, help the plant get water and nutrients, help occupy sites that might otherwise be sites of infection or nematode intrusion. And so mycorrhizal fungi are very beneficial to plants, and almost all agricultural plants are infected by mycorrhizal fungi. As far as I know, the only ones that aren't are the Brassica family. So the next slide, please. This is just a diagram from the book, just showing about mycorrhizal fungi that they grow out. Also, what's that they basically extend what the plant into the soil and give it a much more greater ability to interact with the soil. The next slide, please. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about plants, soil, plant, and pests. And that's disease, insects. We could talk about weeds if people want to as well. But the thing that's really interesting to me, and something I learned along the way, it's nothing I learned when I was a student at the time, is that plants have impressive defense capabilities against diseases and insects. And some of this occurs as the plants interact with its microbiome. I presume everyone's aware that we've got all these organisms living on our skin, in our mouth, in our gut, the human microbiome. Well, plants have the same, well, all animals and plants have a microbiome with organisms living on their surfaces, inside them. And so this microbiome is interacting with the root, and some call it talking, back and forth, and sharing resources. And so it's a very important. We want to keep that microbiome active. And one of the things, by the way, about a third of what the plant produces during photosynthesis is shipped down to the root for the root to use to grow and to excrete into the soil, the rhizosphere, immediately around the root. And so let's go back to that other slide first, please.
Sorry.
Anyway, and so about 15% of the total of what the plant produces may be going to feed the microbiome. I'm talking about for photosynthesis that then gets transported down to the roots, and the roots transported into the rhizosphere. So you've developed through coevolution of plants, microorganisms, and insects some of these defense capabilities. And this includes plants signaling to beneficials when they're under attack. And that's the next slide, which is also from the book. If you look at number 1, you can see that there is near the number 1, just above it, there's a tomato hornworm caterpillar. If you've ever grown tomatoes, you may have run across these guys. They're nasty, and they can grow quite big. And but most of the herbivores, the insects that feed on plants, will actually have predators of them, or insects that want to lay their eggs in that particular organism. So what happens when a organism feeds on the plant, that is an herbivore, an insect is feeding on the plant in the larval stage here, the plant produces chemicals first that slow the feeding. It gives it slight case of indigestion. Then it gives off signals, okay? It gives off volatile chemicals from the leaves that attract the beneficial insects. And those insects then lay their eggs in the larvae of the plant. That's the arrow going to the right, where that insect is attacking the caterpillar, and it's not feeding on it. It's laying its insects in the plant, in the caterpillar. It's depositing also a virus which deactivates the caterpillar's immune system. And then as the eggs develop, they kill the caterpillar. All right. So that is an amazing defense mechanism that many plants have to many of the herbivores. Many of those insects that are doing the attacking are wasps. These are little tiny wasps, not the kind that will sting us or bother us. But there's a third line of defense also, that the plant, as it's being fed on, if you look by number 3, there's another caterpillar there, and you might see little droplets. There are supposed to be droplets there showing sort of sugary substances that the plant produces, which is not, so it's called extrafloral. It's not by the flower, but it's a nectar flow that beneficials can use. So the beneficial is actually getting a lot out of this relationship, this particular wasp. Go on to the next slide, please. If you're interested in this, which I found, by the way, absolutely fascinating, the whole story about it, there's a new book by Joe Lewis called The New Farm Language. This is the fellow who really, with all his coworkers, who he gives full credit in the book, talks about his life growing up as a sharecropper's son in Mississippi, and getting to the university, becoming a professor. He worked for the Agricultural Research Service in Tifton, Georgia, for most of his professional career. And he's the one with coworkers who deciphered that whole issue that I just showed you. And it's a fascinating book, just about him and about how they found it out and what they found out about it, and how you could train these wasps to other to other odors if you wanted to. It's a fascinating story. We don't have time to get into. Next slide, please. Okay, so healthy plants grown in healthy soils are usually less attractive to insect pests, or they're better able to defend themselves, or just like what I talked about, call in or recruit defenders that will protect them. But don't forget, you got to have the beneficial organisms nearby if we're talking about these little wasps, let's say. So you need habitat for them in and around the fields, all right? If you show just the next slide. This is just showing you a field where there's plantings going through in the middle of the field from left to right or right to left, and also going through the field sort of towards the left of the screen. You can see that there have been plantings of flowering plants. And the purpose of this was to provide habitat, in addition to that, in the field boundaries for the beneficial insects to have some place to live nearby where the crop is growing. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is switching gears, but staying still with the defense issue. This is showing a red clover, but there's other plants also. When disease organisms and non-disease organisms produce chemicals, they stimulate the below ground part of the plant, that is the roots, to produce salicylic acid, which we know of as aspirin, and it gets transported to the upper part of the plant, that is above ground. That causes the plant to produce many defense proteins, and those defense proteins provide resistance to a variety of plant pathogens. So this particular type of resistance to disease is called systemic acquired resistance. Next slide, please. Again, this is from the book. This is all from chapter 8, some of these, by the way. This is a different type of resistance. These are plant growth promoting bacteria in the rhizosphere. They stimulate the plant roots, causing them to produce defense hormones such as ethylene and jasmonate that get increased throughout the plant. And those also provide a resistance to a variety of plant pathogens. So this is called induced systemic resistance. So we want those organisms in the soil so that they'll be there to be able to do this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just that there are new techniques. This is from a recent article, October 2021, predicting measures of soil health using the microbiome and also machine learning. My co-author of the book is a co-author of this article, Harold Van Ness. Next slide, please. Promotion of soil biodiversity and activity. Basically, we want to use more complex rotations. We want to use cover crops, decrease the tillage, and increase organic matter. Next slide, please. So we, instead of corn, soybeans, like what's common in the Midwest, the more you can have, the more different crops you can have in a rotation, the better off you are. And that provides diversity below ground because you're feeding the soil with different types of crop residues. You're feeding them with different types of root exudates. So different types of plants contributes to the increase in complexity of the soil microbiome. Next slide, please. Okay, so this can be, you can get biodiversity above ground in space. This is an example of just lots of different plants being grown in basically one field. These are in beds for vegetable production. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I think I had a slide in that I took out, and it's also over time, of course. When you're rotating crops, you're getting biodiversity over time, but it's helping the plant provide that. I mean, the soils are helped to create a more biodiverse environment by the different types of plants that are being grown there. Okay, cover crops. Cover crops, you can't say too much. You can't praise them too highly, okay, in my opinion. Here's on the upper left is a corn silage field that was harvested, where there are no residues there on the field except a little stubble at the bottom there, maybe 6, 7, 8 inches. So this isn't for grain, which does leave a lot of residues. But you can see what happens if you plant a cover crop, and this is rye, which is very common, winter rye at the end of the season, to help keep the soil covered during the winter months and provide some organic matter, some nutrient retention, etc. Next slide, please. So this is just another way of handling cover crops. So this is upper left it's a rye vetch mix. The farmer there had mowed down a strip, and planted tomatoes. That's the lower right is the tomatoes later on, where he then went and mowed the rest of it to provide mulch. And that's another way of handling cover crops. Next slide, please. People are using cover crop mixes. Some are using 7, 8, 9, 10 crops. This is winter peas, crimson clover, and cereal rye as a mix, but the mixes have become very popular. The next slide. This is what's called a tillage radish or forage radish. It's a big, big radish, which produces a huge hole, as you can see, lower right. It winter kills. Please go back. I mean, there are farmers who just love this. It helps with soil compaction. It's because it's winter killed, at least I think pretty far south, as far as I know. You don't have an issue with suppressing it. Next slide, please. So, cover crops do so many things that it's hard to say, well, we're planting cover crops because we're interested in controlling pests. But they do. They help tremendously. And if we start on the up, suppressing weeds, if you pick the cover crops correctly for your nematodes, they can suppress nematodes, increase water infiltration, reduce erosion. I'm going clockwise. And decrease soil compaction, attract beneficial insects, decrease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very, very powerful practice. And one of the things is to enhance mycorrhizal fungi, because when you grow a cover crop over winter, when you wouldn't have a crop there, it helps the mycorrhizal fungi multiply. They leave more spores, so that when you plant your crop in the spring, you have more spores than you would have had if you had left the soil bare over winter. So it enhances mycorrhizal fungi in the coming crop, okay, as opposed to leaving the soil bare. Obviously, if it's a legume, you're adding nitrogen, but it's a very powerful tool for promoting soil health because it has so many effects. The next slide, please. Just reduced tillage, showing there are different ways to do it. You can even transplant into a sod which has been suppressed by rolling over it or by mowing it. Upper right, it was suppressed. It was just grown in residues from the previous year, just directly seeded into that. That's a soybean. Next slide, please. Next one. Click. So organic matter. There's the living, there's the dead, and there's the very dead. Okay, this is the terminology of some scientists, one of whom lived in this house, but it was a publication in 1908 that came out of the Vermont Agricultural Experiment Station, in which they were tasked with trying to find out why the soils of Vermont had become worn out. And they said that soil organic matter depletion was the major cause of the worn out soils, what was called worn out soils or degraded soils. And they said, well, there's the living organisms in the soil, including roots, of course, of plants when they're alive. Then when they die, they're dead. And the very dead is the well-decomposed material that's so-called humus. It's maybe inside aggregates that are not accessible. Maybe adsorbed on clay particles. That's what is the very dead. That's not easily decomposed, in other words. The next slide, please. Okay, well, let's do this quickly. Basically, what's the whole interest in organic matter? I mean, organic matter and its management is really the heart of the story of soil health, because organic matter influences all soil properties. And what we've just talked about, that is rotations and use of cover crops, if they're chosen properly and used well, will contribute to organic matter management. You are managing the organic matter when you are using a rotation. You're managing the organic matter when you're using a cover crop. But when you increase organic matter in the soil, it has effects on nutrient availability, on aggregation, that is soil structure, on water storage, which is influenced by soil structure, diversity of the organisms and the activity of the organisms. You know, are they really doing anything? Are they just sitting there? The color, of course, it gets darkened, and the presence of growth stimulating compounds, which is really important. And of course, I think you're all aware that the soils participate in important global cycles, including carbon, nitrogen, and the water cycle, are strongly influenced by soil organic matter. There is more carbon stored in the soil, in the world's soils, about 3 times more than is in the atmosphere of the earth. Okay. If you have a soil, you're standing on an acre of soil that has 1% organic matter to about 7 inches, let's say, you have as much carbon in your soil as in the atmosphere above your soil. Okay. So there's a lot of carbon stored in soils. There's a lot of interest in what's called carbon sequestration, paying farmers to increase their organic matter storage because you're storing carbon. Organic matter is carbon with hydrogen, nitrogen, other chemicals attached, other elements. The next, please. Okay, in addition to use of cover crops, better rotations, reduced tillage, you can also be adding compost or other organic amendments. And some compost, by the way, when they're relatively fresh, in other words, they've finished the composting process, but they haven't, and they've cured just a little bit, but haven't sat around for ages, they may be very highly disease suppressive. That while they're supplying nutrients, they help with water storage, etc. They're also maybe suppressing diseases. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what the difference in management practices can do to a soil. This is from the Rodale Research Center in Pennsylvania. And this was taken some years back. I think it's on the back cover of the book, if I'm not mistaken. And it's basically, these are plots that were handled differently by this point, it was probably 10 or 15 years. By now, it's well over 20 years. And on the left-hand side of the screen, well, first off, if you are a plant, would you rather have your roots growing on the left or would you have them growing on the right? Okay. I've never had a person who would say they would rather have their plants roots growing on the left. Okay. That is the more compacted, lighter brown soil rather than the one that's darker, which is clearly more porous, more aggregation, etc. And that is basically the difference between conventional management and management using manures, using cover crops, and better rotations, and then just a cash grain system, which is what's on the left. So that's really, this is what management can do. All right. The next slide, please. Okay, well, this is I wanted to make this a relatively quick presentation. We started late, I understand, and I still wanted to leave time for some discussion. This is the book that has come out, just came out, I believe, early summer. This is the 4th edition. And if you click again, Janelle,
you have the link.
You get to just go to SARE.org, and that is the exact site for accessing the book, downloading it for free or using it online, which is very convenient also. And I think it's $23 to buy it from them. Harold and I, by the way, do not get any do not. This is a USDA program. We're not getting any royalties, so it's this is not. I'm not flogging the book, as they say in Britain. You know, trying to sell your own book to make money. So this is being done to help agriculture, basically. So this we have some new chapters in here. We have one on urban, growing crops in an urban setting. We have enlarged some of the discussion. We have a discussion on agroforestry, which wasn't in the previous edition. And so there are some major changes, some stuff that's pretty much the same as the fourth edition. So that is available for anyone that would like to access it. And with that, I'd like to open it up, and we have time for questions or discussion, and anything that I went through too quickly that that you'd like me to talk about in more detail.
So we have a couple of questions that came up in the chat while you were speaking, and one of them, which I attempted to answer briefly, but then I think you could probably expound on this, is when you had talked about increasing organic matter, to what extent, then this person wanted quantification of 5%, 10%. My response to that was any increase is good. Obviously, depends on where you are on the globe, because if you're in warmer climate, North Carolina, if you can get your soil organic matter above 1%, especially in like the Piedmont region, you're doing very well, because it's just a battle against the increased amount of microbial activity. It's time. But perhaps you have a little bit more to say about that.
Well, I could say a lot more about it, but depends how much.
Do you have? I mean, you know of a magic way to get organic matter in a warmer climate?
Well, no, you just have to work harder, basically.
Yeah.
You know, it's an issue of climate. It's also an issue of the soil itself, because it's easier to raise the organic matter content when you have more fine material in soils, more silts, clays in soils, because the organic matter can be adsorbed on the surfaces, and it can be, if your soils are better aggregated, which tends to happen in more what used to be called heavier soils, but are basically, you know, more clay or silty soils, that will store organic matter inside those aggregates if you have better aggregation. When you have more sandy soil, poorer aggregation, you don't have great storage capability. So in general, the organic matter content of soils in the natural state, in general, there are exceptions, obviously, goes from about 1% to 5%, 6%, 7%. You know, the soil, I'm talking about agricultural soils. Yeah. Soils out in the Champlain Valley of Vermont, which is a clay soil, you can have, it's not unusual to have 4 or 5% organic matter. And you need more organic matter when you have more clay in the soil. So, but there's no magic number of how much organic matter should be in your soil. I think it's a question of just trying to work it up, you know, trying to increase it, because organic matter, as I've mentioned quickly, I know, has such a profound effect on soil properties and on the plants. So anything that you can do, and you know, I would say sort of all of the above: a better rotations, use of cover crops, adding compost, whatever you can do, reducing tillage also, which helps reduce erosion, of course, which is one of the ways organic matter is lost, because you're losing topsoil, which is, you know, almost by definition, it's soil that's enriched in organic matter. If you're losing topsoil, you're losing organic matter. So in warmer climates, yes, it's more of a challenge. On coarser textured soils, which is the terminology now, it used to be called, maybe farmers still do, light soils, but coarser textured soils, it's more challenging for sure. And you're not going to get sandy soils up to 2 or 3 or 4, 5% organic matter, unless it's just incredibly artificially, and you just bring in a huge amount of organic matter and incorporate it. You can do it, but it's not, you know, it just doesn't make sense from an agronomic point of view.
Yes. So then someone had a question how do you provide biodiversity if you plant perennials and also in a small home garden, because we do have some people here that aren't necessarily on the large scale farming. And then what kind of cover crops do you recommend? So often I get that similar question, how do you do that with a perennial system and adding biodiversity? But I think you could incorporate a cover crop.
You can. There was a photograph which I had in an initial version of this presentation, which I took out, which showed cover crops being grown in a vineyard in California. So there are possibilities in perennial systems for growing cover crops because if the system is such that not all of the whole surface is covered in perennials, that you have strips that you can plant annuals and then to suppress them and use them as they could be your pathways, that are going to use later in the season. You can grow something in them, suppress them in a garden setting, probably just by walking on them, and so that is something that helps. But yes, cover crops are certainly a lot easier to use when you're in a system where you're using the whole soil and not most of it being devoted to perennials and using it for annuals or biannuals or non-perennials. As to which cover crops, there's a chapter in the book on that and how you select them. There's also a book that's published by SARE, which is available at the same website, sare.org, if you go to publications, or maybe they call it resources now. Of course, I think it's Managing Cover Crops Profitably. And I believe there's a new edition of that. But it goes in both of those, but you'll find it in the chapter in cover crops in the book, Building Soils. It depends what you're after. If you're after certain aspects, such as weed suppression or increasing nitrogen availability for my grain crop, or I want to suppress a nematode that's particularly nasty. Those all may lead you to specific issues, specific cover crops that'll help, or specific groups of cover crops that will help. There's so many choices now. I mean, at the beginning, when people started with cover crops, again, of course, cover crops are old. This is nothing new. What's new is the renewed interest in them and the understanding of the multiple effects that they have and how profound they can help you create a healthy ecosystem. So it started really with rye, with vetch, crimson clover, and then now there's just this explosion of numbers of cover crops that people are trying. That I showed you that slide. That was from Ray Weil in Maryland of the tillage radish. I mean, that's one formidable crop. I mean, that's one root. That's a big hole. And it does, and it actually helps to help decompact your soil. And so, are you concerned about? Do you need something that's going to die off over winter, or do you have a way to suppress it that you are comfortable with in the springtime? If you want it to die over winter, then you better plant something like oats, which I presume will die down your neck of the woods as well, but certainly dies up here. Or the forage radish, the crops like that, then you don't have to deal with suppression because they're dead. So is that an issue? So there are all these factors that go in to deciding what makes sense. And some farmers, as I've said, have said, hey, I want to put 4, 5, or 6, or 7, or 8 of these together, and let's see what happens. And they're finding they think it's really helping them.
Yeah,
So,
Nathan Lauder, who is the USDA NRCS soil health kind of guy on our kind of the East Coast now, right? And he presented in this kind of talk series, and he on his farm, he has 800 acres in North Carolina, and he actually has usually a mix of about 8 cover crops that he puts together and does and continuously does cover crops. He actually has one area when he does his infiltration demo in person that he keeps tilled, just this tiny little area, because he needs a spot to be able to pull from to do an infiltration demonstration. But he is 800 acres of all no-till, cover crop, integration, rotational grazing, because of the power of what he's seen and what it does to his soil. It's just, and just so that tillage radish often does not die here.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And I did in New Hampshire, I had it and I tried to till it like early before the frost came.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It just came back. It was like you couldn't kill it. So for those in the, I mean, but if cattle will eat it, I think, or pigs or something, so you can maybe use it as a remediation for breaking up some plowpan. So we had another question, and this is an interesting question. I'm going to be intrigued to hear your answer. Hypothetically, we can grow everything without soil. So will soil be important for our planet? My understanding is yes, due to the global cycle.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you can grow everything without soil. You don't even need soil for meat anymore because they're growing it in test tubes or in, they're growing it in laboratories. So, to grow plants. Yeah, but that, I mean, to me, it makes no ecological sense to be growing to especially what we'd have to do to grow in our climate up north. The heating costs, the lighting costs, the short season now in this time of the year up here, much fewer hours than you have of daylight. But I don't think any of those make sense, except if you've got a niche crop. I mean, I'm talking about soilless culture growing, like the baby greens is a big deal, or things like that grow very quickly. You can harvest them, replant, and you can get a good price for them, and you can, those types of things, fine. But we're not going to grow the major crops that are grown for widespread consumption, of wheat and corn and beans and whatever. There's just no way in the world, in my opinion, that they're going to be grown in soilless culture for environmental purposes mainly, and also economic ones. I don't think they can compete. They're, with growing it in a building versus growing it outside. I think there's a lot of hype with regard to this, and I think it's undeserved hype.
Yeah, there's a lot of a debate about agriculture land being utilized for even just solar panels and displacing the arable land, because farmers see that as their only way to make, some additional income without losing the farm. But there is now a new kind of genre of agriculture called agrivoltaics that actually is beginning to show promise as a way to both get the solar panels, but also be able to, in fact, this morning on NPR, I'm a bit of an NPR junkie, they were talking about a farm in Boulder or near Boulder, Colorado, and they found that the plants use 50% less water because they're under a shade. These particular solar panels actually transmit light through. And so it reduces the amount of transpiration by the plant. So they're able to grow crops in the height of the summer when they would normally be maybe more stressed. The solar panel actually takes some of that heat stress out. So I found that pretty interesting. And so it'd be interesting to see how that evolves over time. And to see if that's a win-win, I guess.
There's been some folks, I don't know how successful, who have been grazing animals in with solar panels. Again, I think I don't know the results, but I think that's
the sheep work well. Goats, on the other hand, will climb on the solar panels. So I have heard that sheep solar farming or solar grazing is what they're calling it. That works when you integrate in the more docile sheep underneath to kind of keep the forage there. Let's see, are there any? Oh, someone actually asked, what was the cover crop in the vineyard in California that you mentioned?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, it was tall, so it was a grass that was being mowed. So it could have been, an annual ryegrass. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
it was tall enough, so it was definitely a grass. And by the way, on cover crops, there are a number of, not every chapter has it, but at the end of a number of the chapters, there are farm profiles. So you can get to know a little bit about some of these farmers. And again, they discuss why they're doing what they're doing. There are at least two I know that use cover crops significantly. So, yeah.
So Dr. Franz Lubers is on the call today. He has an interesting question for you. He says, hi, Dr. Magdoff. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on soil organic matter. If you were given an extra 10,000 pounds of organic carbon to apply to an acre of soil, already having 4,000 pounds of carbon in the top foot of soil, where in the profile would you prefer to place this organic carbon?
Well, hello, anyway. Hello back. Listen, clearly, the deeper you can get it, the better, within reason. There's a whole, I wouldn't call it philosophy, there's like people know about double digging, where this is only done at garden scale, where you dig down a foot and you put the soil to the side. You're digging a trench, basically, put the soil to the side, and then you take a rake and you're breaking up the soil down below it, and you're incorporating organic matter into that soil, the second foot down I'm talking about, and then incorporate more into the soil that's on top, put it back on top. And that's a lot of work, but it breaks up subsoils. It gets organic matter incorporated in the subsoils, and so it would be great to distribute that extra 10,000, not just on the surface soil, but to get it down to some depth, to influence the characteristics down there. It's one of the things that I've talked to people about. Say, why do we call topsoil topsoil? Because it's on the top? No, what makes topsoil topsoil? I say, if you come in with a bulldozer and we scrape off the surface foot of soil, what you have now is that topsoil. It's on the top, but it's not topsoil. Well, what makes topsoil topsoil? It's organic matter. So if you can get organic matter deeper into the soil profile, the better off you are. I mean, this is what's so impressive about the prairie soils, is that you have, because of the deep root systems of those perennials of the prairies, you have organic matter deep in the profile. So this is what's allowed them to be sort of abused over the years by monocultures or just alternation of soybeans and corn. Is because they had such tremendous amounts of organic matter, and they had them to depth. Okay.
Yes, some of the perennial grasses that Dr. Jackson at the West are the blanking on it's in Kansas.
The Land
Institute. The Land Institute at West Jackson, and some of his kernza in the grass that he shows. I mean, the roots go down to so deep. It's amazing. So we have one final question in here.
Just before. Mm-hmm. Just want to say, in the book, I'm not flogging the book.
Oh no, okay. It's a good read.
There is a photograph from the Land Institute. I mean, that they took it, and we credit them. But it shows wheat, which we think of as having a pretty good root system, compared to a perennial, a perennial wheatgrass, and it's just amazing. The perennial wheatgrass is just, I've forgotten how deep it is, but it's just huge, and so it's showing you the whole root system that they excavated and cleaned, the comparison, and it's dramatic.
Yeah, I was at a conference where he spoke and he had a rollout, like real life rollout poster.
Oh, yeah, it does,
He
yes.
rolled out
Yeah,
and it
it does.
just rolls out. It's like, I mean, it's got to be 12 feet of a poster, but it's it's real to scale picture. So I have one last question, and then while you answer that, I'm actually going to put up a poll because I like to get an idea of how this talk has increased awareness or knowledge. So this person says, when talking to a farmer about regenerative agriculture, is there a general time period you should recommend to allow the process to show results?
Well, it's clearly a few years. I mean, normally you wouldn't expect to see dramatic results in year one or year two. It's something that it takes time to develop. And sometimes you run into problems. There are many people who switch to organic, and I'm not saying organic is the only way to go to be regenerative, if we say. But there are people who switch to that and ran into tremendous problems with nitrogen availability. And and with weed control, those are the two big issues that they ran into. Well, once you know these things ahead of time, you can plan accordingly, and they can help you get into it quicker and run into fewer problems by just by using appropriate methods, basically, and practices. So, but I would say we're talking about a few years. Now, how many is a few? We're talking 2, 3, 4, something probably in that order of magnitude. You should start seeing some things fairly quickly. Some might be quite dramatic. Depends how bad you're starting with. Also, if you're starting with a very, a very depleted soil, a very degraded soil, you may see some effects fairly quickly with soil aggregation. Less crusting of the surface, which I didn't talk about today, but that's a problem in low organic matter soils of certain types, where the soil seals on the surface when the rain hits it at the beginning of the spring after it's been plowed and harrowed. You've broken down the aggregates, and the rain does the rest. It destroys the rest of the aggregates, the soil surface seals, and then water just runs off the fields. And so if you add a fair amount of organic matter using cover crops, also it should be fairly, within a couple of years, you should see a difference there. You should see better infiltration with a cover crop than without a cover crop, even in year one, just from that point of view. So certain aspects you may see fairly quickly, others it may take some years to develop.
Yes, for sure. I mean, down here we see that for sure, that essentially the crusting over with our high clay soils in the Piedmont, if you don't have organic matter, it's very important for that water to infiltrate, because you are getting these stronger storms. So we want it to get into the ground. So I really, really appreciate your time. And I hope we can have you back again at some point next year to even speak on the same topic. I think with 8 billion people on the planet, and all of them need to hear this. Well, okay, well, take off a few million for being small and under the age of 5. But most people, if they are living on this planet, should certainly be concerned with the health of our soils. So I appreciate your time and all of your talk. It's great.